Hey there everyone, Noir here and welcome to another Petscop Fan Theories episode. Just like before, if you're new to this series, I would highly suggest pausing this video and watching the rest of the series first, because this could potentially be the final episode in the series, and the analyses come to their conclusion within this episode. I'll give you a couple of seconds here to pause and then you'll be all set to carry on after you've caught up. Okay. So here we are, final two analyses of Petscop to date. I've been working hard to put things together as a whole when it comes to what I think the entirety of Petscop represents, and it's now the time to do that. So as you can see, this episode is the longest one I've ever done. But before I give my thoughts on that, let's get right into analysing Petscop 9 and 10. Petscop 9 begins with a demo reel showing correlations between the puzzles in Even Care and the events that occur in the New Maker plane. We see the treadmill that represents the Daisy in Petscop 2, starting at 16, going down to 3, waiting for a few seconds, and then hitting 0 at the exact same rate that the petals are plucked. This gives the impression that the events in the demo reel are occurring at the same time that Paul's doing them in the game, which has made some people speculate that Paul is doing these actions unwillingly, as if he's being forced to comply with these rules. However, I think it's more likely that the demo reel is a physical representation of how things can be perceived. What may look innocent on the outside could be malicious to others. We go back to Paul trying to capture Care NLM, then he decides to only go down the stairs partially and turn right. This changes the character into the Shadow Monster Man, or Marvin. This gives Paul the ability to access the windmill, which houses a disturbing mechanism with the head of Care without eyebrows, a tool, and a myriad of pieces. This is a direct reference to the machine that Mike talked about, but I don't think that it's the actual machine. Paul interacts with the tool and it removes the pieces. Many have theorized that the tool is something that was used to tune a piano. As you can see here, it looks fairly similar, but I believe that it's something else, something that has multiple uses. A multi-tool. A multi-tool, as the name suggests, can be used for various things, especially for mechanisms. It can also be used in a violent manner, many of them having attachments such as knives, corkscrews, and other sharp implements that could easily inflict bodily harm to others. So I believe the tool being used to hurt Mike and also be useful in fixing a machine puts a multi-tool in a strong footing. Paul returns once again to the child library and inputs the face he saw in the windmill and gets the message of, "You found her. You may visit her room." Once inside, we see two avatars, the one on the other end of the room, which is clearly a clone version of Paul, is reading the note that Paul will read seconds later, and then it walks off screen. Paul does the exact same movements as the other avatar, but the reason for this is once again different, depending on who you ask. Some say that it's another link towards Paul being forced to copy the events exactly, while others believe that this is a representation of 2 points in time colliding with each other. I follow the latter in that regard. The note that Paul reads is as follows. "You must have guessed, but I was looking through your things. I found that picture of you from 1977, standing in front of an old windmill with your friend. You went there, and it was a bad idea. Your friend and the windmill both disappeared into thin air. Her sister was holding the camera. She took another picture minutes later. Just you, no windmill, and no friend. You married her sister, and years later, your friend was reborn as your daughter. Your wife won't admit this is true, but I know it, because I found the evidence. Your friend never returned with you, and the windmill was gone. I went to see it myself. Where is it? What did you do? Raina, New Maker." I will explain what I think this means after I've completed the analyses on these two episodes, because this is where I think the story began for Petscop. Paul heads into the next room where there is a key in a gift box and another gift box which houses an item which is blacked out. This item completely shocks and disgusts Paul. because we can only see the sides of the item in question. I can't decide whether it houses a message for Paul himself or a disturbing image of some sort. Paul then manages to find a room with a final gift box, which he opens and it takes him back to the New Maker plane. But the door that brought him to this part of the game that was previously locked has now reopened, giving him access to Even Care again. When he returns to Even Care, a few things have changed. Ronith, Randis and Wavy's rooms have been locked, and Penn's piano has disappeared like the room was in the demo reel at the start of the episode. Paul runs on the treadmill and sets the number to -1, which freezes the game. It's never really made clear as to why this happened, but I think that it's once again relating to the message that Paul got from Tool that said you can't go back in time, as well as changing the result of the Loves Me Not game that Paul played with the Daisy, leaving the answer as Loves Me instead of Loves Me Not, thus changing the events of the game and making Care NLM uncatchable. Paul reloads the game and is now able to catch Care NLM. Her description reads as follows: Care NLM escaped from the school's basement and wandered the New Maker plane for days. To catch her, you had to lie, but it may not be a lie forever. You're the New Maker. You can turn Care NLM into Care A and close the loop. This is where Revelations take an incredibly disturbing turn, given the deductions that have already been made with regards to Marvin's occupation, the note in Petscop 3 and Petscop 11's rendition of Care's kidnapping. It's fairly clear what all of these represent. Marvin kidnapped Care, took her to the school's basement, and at some point during her incarceration she escaped, broken and helpless. Paul then takes Care NLM to the child library and places her into the recess, thus submitting her into the adoption center itself. But Paul changes his mind and collects her again, probably to attempt at changing her into Care A as the game suggests. We know from subsequent episodes though that that is not possible, because instead of just trying to change the pet into something else, Care goes from A to NLM in separate story-focused events, not through in-game actions by the player. There's also a particular line of text that's important to this segment, which is, what month is it anyway? What year is it? The month, I feel, is November, and the year is 1997. This is when the missing girl was found, presumably resulting in her being placed into care instead of being taken home to her mother and father, or the wife and Marvin. Closing the loop is represented by Paul collecting Care NLM again after placing her in the child library, something that did not happen in the case of the missing girl. I feel that she was left in the adoption center instead. Petscop 10 begins with Paul in Even Care again, investigating the area that he caught Amber way back in Petscop 1. He tries to open both gates on the cages that Amber jumped to and from, and also tried to leave, but this results once again in the game crashing. This is due to the fact that the cages represent the two sides of the Quitter's room, and both sides cannot be accessible at the same time. In the game's code, one must be closed and the other has to be open, otherwise Tiara and Belle will be able to leave. But Paul reloads the game and the data still has both sides opened, so he's able to access both sides, but opts for the opposite one to his usual side that he goes into. We know from Petscop 12 that this action results in both Tiara and Belle being freed. Paul then returns to Tool and asks what month is it and what year is it, which result in a calendar appearing, and where was the windmill, which sounds very much like the question that the person in Petscop 8 asked Paul to say. The answer is blacked out, which completes 2 out of the 3 things that were expected to be censored. A present with a sticker on it, which is the present in Petscop 9, and something on a wall in a black house. That's what I'm assuming that blacked out section is meant to represent. We're currently missing the text written on a chalkboard at the time of writing this script, which I believe, it might possibly be in Petscop 14 now that 13 is out. because it clearly wasn't there. And I believe it would be in Marvin's classroom that we saw in the final segment demo reel of Petscop 11. Now then, with those two analyses completed, allow me to give you my conclusion on what I think the story of Petscop is from beginning to end. Please take note that I am in no way stating that this is definitely the story. I have no connection in any way to Petscop itself aside from creating this series to help theorize on it. Therefore, I can only speculate. If you have a different idea on it, that's perfectly fine, and I'm certainly not the person to say that your thoughts and opinions are less valid than my own. Here we go. As far as I can tell, we begin the story of Petscop at the windmill in 1977. Marvin arrives there with his two friends, one that would later become his wife, and her sister. Tiara in this case, the real name is not provided to us. During this time, due to unfortunate circumstances or malicious, Tiara is killed, and both Marvin and the wife get rid of her body and all evidence relating to the accident. The evidence for me that's pointing to this fact is that basically Rainer mentions it. He mentions two photographs, one with the sister, one without. The fact that it also mentions that there's no windmill as well, I think is just alluding to the fact that that windmill is there, but there's no evidence of the accident that occurred. Years later, the two of them are married and give birth to a girl, Belle. As Belle grows older, she begins to look more and more like her aunt, which died tragically in 1977. This begins to cause Marvin's mind, probably due to superstition, to think that Tiara was reborn as his daughter. At some point before or after the birth of Belle, or Care within the game, Marvin and his wife adopt a boy named Michael. Over the years, Marvin began to slowly show his violent nature towards Mike in the form of overly stern parenting methods, usually turning to using his multi-tool as a weapon against him. Mike also ended up being hit by a vehicle, presumably driven by Marvin, at some point. This act, alongside his constant abuse, led to Mike resenting Marvin greatly, so he began to try and find some way of making him suffer. Belle also suffered abuse from Marvin, possibly more so than Mike because of his superstitions, which led to her running away numerous times. However, on June 5th, 1997, Belle decides to return home and reads a note from her mother, Marvin's wife, that begs her to stay. Whether or not her mother was aware of Marvin's abusive behavior is unclear, but I would say that she's not. Marvin comes home early from his job as a music teacher at school and notices that Belle is inside. His mind going into overload results in him deciding to put his thoughts of Tiara now being his daughter to rest by killing her. A few minutes later, Marvin kidnaps Belle and puts her in the school basement. The amount of time that Belle is inside the basement until her escape is not known, but it is known that when the wife returned home, or possibly Mike returned home, one of them called the police to inform them that she is once again missing. Because this is a common occurrence, the police already have a reference photograph of her that they can use to assist in finding her. At some point, Belle manages to escape and hides until she's found by the authorities on November the 10th. The result, whether it was because she told the police about what happened, or because of her constant runaway attempts, is for them to place her into adoption. Regardless, Marvin was not charged and carried on as normal, but Mike knew what happened. Knowing that he would not be believed by the authorities due to the lack of evidence to be able to support his case, he completed a game that he began working on in 1996 that was created as payback against Marvin in some way, shape or form. He decided to revise the game's contents in an effort to inform others about what had happened, and he completed it in 2000 under the alias of Rainer Newmaker. He decided to leave the game for Paul to discover in an effort to retell the true events of Belle's disappearance. Fast forward to 2017, and Paul decides to record his playthrough and investigation of Petscop, unaware of its connection to Rainer, Marvin, or Bell. At some point, Raina caught wind of this and decided to get in touch with Paul, thus taking ownership of the channel with somebody else, who I presume to be Bell, who could have quite easily reconnected with Mike years later. As time went on, Paul began to remember the events that Petscop was trying to convey, which distressed him to the point of trying to quit. Raina and Bell convinced him to carry on, but what method or tactics they used to do that are still unclear. Their focus for keeping the recordings going? To attract Marvin's attention and let him know that they're onto him, and sooner or later, he will pay for his crimes. And there we have it. That's the end of Petscop fan theories, at least for now anyway. All of the episodes are analysed up to this point in time, but I can assure you that if another episode appears, I'll be straight back onto it. I would also like to thank each and every one of you. Yes, you. Everyone who liked this video, or any of the previous installments, everyone who's commented, everyone who's shared the video to everybody else, because without your feedback, I would have never carried this series on for as long as it has been. But I'm so glad that I did, because it allowed me to speak with so many other fans of Petscop, and I've befriended so many people in the process. I'd also like to thank directly the creators of Petscop for creating a story that will not only stick in my mind for numerous reasons, but it also brought together thousands upon thousands of people, all of them filled with intrigue, reverence, and a yearning for answers. Thank you to everybody who enjoyed this series, and till next time, keep on surviving.